When I accepted the job at the COSTCO warehouse in Seattle, I didn't think much about it. I was 34, broke, and out of options after moving here from Portland. Life hadn't been kind, my bills were piling up, and my landlord was getting dangerously close to tossing me out. The ad promised decent pay for a shelf organizer, and I figured I'd get some peace and quiet in the vastness of a warehouse. Just me and rows of products. No customers, no drama. The warehouse itself, though, had a reputation. Workers whispered about things moving on their own, pallets appearing where they shouldn't, and an employee who'd vanished years ago without a trace. I laughed it off, convincing myself it was just the kind of nonsense that bored night workers dreamed up. But I'd soon learn that some stories stick for a reason. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I pushed through the employee entrance, my footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. At midnight, the COSTCO warehouse felt like an entirely different world. Gone were the bustling crowds and chattering families. Instead, an oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant hum of industrial freezers. My keys jangled too loudly as I locked my locker, each metallic clink making me more aware of just how alone I was. The employee break room, with its cheap laminate tables and aging microwave, felt like the last outpost of normalcy before stepping into that vast expanse of towering shelves. Tom, the night manager, was waiting by the time clock. Even in the harsh lighting, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he gripped his clipboard. His navy blue COSTCO vest looked worn, the edges frayed like he'd been wearing the same one for years. "Melissa?" He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm glad you made it. Most people see the size of this place at night and turn right around." He let out a forced chuckle that died quickly in the empty air. The warehouse stretched out behind him like a canyon of consumer goods. The shelves rose at least 40 feet high, disappearing into shadows where the fluorescent lights couldn't quite reach. In the daytime, these aisles would be a testament to abundance. But now, in the midnight quiet, they felt more like walls in a maze that could swallow you whole. Tom handed me a pallet jack, its red paint chipped and worn smooth in places where countless hands had gripped it before mine. The wheels squeaked slightly as I tested it, the sound unnaturally sharp in the silence. "This is yours now," he said, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Don't leave it. Not even for a bathroom break. You understand?" There was an intensity in his eyes that made me want to step back. "Sure," I replied, trying to sound casual even as questions bubbled up in my mind. "Just keep it with me. Got it?" He nodded, seemingly relieved that I wasn't asking why. "Your section is aisles 7 through 12. Basic restocking and organization. Should be straightforward enough." He paused, glancing over his shoulder at the darkness between the shelves. "Just stick to your section, and if anything seems off, anything at all, you come find me in the office." As he walked away, his footsteps fading into the vastness of the warehouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wanted to say more. The pallet jack felt unusually heavy as I wheeled it toward my assigned section, its squeaking wheels marking time like a metronome in the silence. The first aisle loomed before me, perfectly organized boxes of cereal stretching up into the shadows. Everything looked normal enough, but something about the space felt wrong. It was as if the air itself was different here, heavier somehow, like the moment before a storm breaks. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 12:15 a.m. Only 7 hours and 45 minutes to go. As I tucked the phone away, I could have sworn I saw movement in my peripheral vision, high up on one of the shelves. But when I looked directly at it, there was nothing there but boxes, silent and still in their perfect rows. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just nerves about the new job. But as I began to work, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was watching me from somewhere in that forest of shelves, waiting to see what I would do next. The first hour passed in a blur of mindless activity, arranging boxes and checking inventory lists. The work wasn't difficult, just tedious. Lift, move, align, repeat. I fell into a rhythm, trying to ignore how the silence seemed to press in around me, broken only by the squeak of my pallet jack's wheels and the soft thud of cardboard on metal shelving. It wasn't until I paused to wipe the sweat from my forehead that I noticed something odd about the pallet jack's handle. Running my hand along the worn metal, I felt unusual grooves under my fingers. In the harsh fluorescent light, I could make out what looked like scratches. No, not scratches, writing. Leaning closer, I squinted at the crude etchings worn smooth by countless hands before mine. The words had been carved with determination, each letter deep and deliberate. Rule 1. Do not move pallets from the farthest aisle after 1 a.m. Rule 2. If a box falls on its own, do not pick it up. Rule 3. Keep the pallet jack with you at all times. Rule 4. If the lights flicker, return to the break room immediately. Rule 5. Do not organize the products in aisle 13. Rule 6. If you hear your name whispered, do not answer. My fingers traced the grooves, and I jerked my hand back at the touch. The metal was cold, unnaturally cold, like touching ice in summer. Tom's earlier warning about keeping the pallet jack with me suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A way for the veteran employees to mess with the new hire? But something about the desperate nature of the etching suggested otherwise. These weren't casual scratches made in a moment of boredom. Someone had taken the time to carve these rules deep into the metal, as if their life depended on passing this information along. I checked my phone. 12:47 a.m. The warehouse seemed different now, the silence more oppressive. The spaces between the shelves looked darker, deeper somehow. I found myself counting the aisles, my eyes drawn to the number plates mounted high on each row. 7, 8, 9. There it was. Aisle 13. From where I stood, it looked identical to the others, but something about it made my skin crawl. The sound came without warning, the soft scrape of cardboard against metal, somewhere above me. I froze, straining my ears in the silence. The noise came again, this time accompanied by a strange scratching, like fingernails dragging across the shelving. It seemed to be moving, traveling along the top of the aisle toward my position. I gripped the pallet jack's handles tighter, the etched rules pressing into my palms. The scratching stopped directly overhead. Every instinct screamed at me not to look up, but I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I raised my eyes to the highest shelf. Nothing, just rows of perfectly aligned boxes disappearing into shadow. But as I started to lower my gaze, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the boxes near the edge wasn't quite aligned with the others. As I watched, it moved, just a fraction of an inch, all by itself. The rules flashed through my mind. If a box falls on its own, do not pick it up. The box teetered on the edge of the shelf, 40 feet above my head. My muscles tensed, ready to move, but I stood frozen, watching as it finally tipped over and began its descent. The sound it made as it fell wasn't right. Too slow, too deliberate, like it was being lowered by invisible hands. It hit the ground with a dull thud that echoed through the empty aisles. The box lay there, slightly crushed from the impact, its plain brown cardboard unmarked by any labels or barcodes. Every fiber of my being urged me to pick it up, to maintain the perfect order I was hired to keep. But those etched rules kept me rooted in place, my hands white-knuckled on the pallet jack's handles. As I stared at the fallen box, the cardboard shifted slightly, as if something inside was trying to find its way out. I couldn't stop staring at the fallen box. It lay there on the concrete floor, innocuous yet somehow threatening, like a trap waiting to be sprung. The silence in the warehouse pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but too fast. My phone read 12:52 a.m., 8 minutes until the first rule would take effect. The box moved again. It wasn't my imagination this time. The cardboard definitely shifted, like something inside was testing its boundaries. A soft scratching sound emerged from within, reminiscent of fingernails dragging across the inside of the box. My grip tightened on the pallet jack's handles until my knuckles turned white. A voice cut through the silence behind me. "Everything all right over here?" I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. Tom stood at the end of the aisle, his clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. His eyes darted between me and the fallen box, and I watched the color drain from his face. It fell," I stammered, gesturing weakly at the box. "By itself. I didn't touch it." Tom's expression shifted from concern to something closer to terror. "Get back," he whispered, taking a step backward himself. "Now." The scratching from inside the box grew louder, more insistent. The cardboard bulged outward in places it shouldn't have been able to, creating shapes that defied geometry. The air temperature around us plummeted until I could see my breath misting in front of my face. "The rules," Tom's voice cracked. "Did you read them?" I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the box as it continued to deform. "On the pallet jack. Don't pick up fallen boxes." "Good," he said. "But there's more you need to know. The night crew before you—" He stopped abruptly as the fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice. The bulbs hummed with an intensity that made my teeth ache. The third rule flashed through my mind. If the lights flicker, return to the break room immediately. But I hesitated. The box was still there, still moving, and something in me needed to know what was inside. Just one quick look, I thought. What harm could it do? The lights flickered again, longer this time, and in that moment of darkness, I heard it. My name, whispered from somewhere in the depths of the warehouse. "Melissa." The voice was wrong somehow, like multiple voices speaking in almost perfect unison, with one slightly out of sync. "Break room," Tom hissed, already backing away. "Now." I started to follow him, but my pallet jack wouldn't move. The wheels, which had been squeaking all night, were suddenly impossibly silent. I pulled harder, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The metal under my hands had grown so cold it burned. The lights flickered one final time, and the darkness that followed was absolute. I couldn't see Tom, couldn't see the shelves, couldn't even see my own hands in front of my face. But I could hear the box. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a wet tearing sound as cardboard gave way to something else. Then came the footsteps. They were wrong, too many of them, moving in patterns that shouldn't have been possible. They seemed to come from all directions at once, drawing closer with each passing second. And all the while, that whispered chorus of voices kept calling my name, growing louder, more insistent. I abandoned the pallet jack. I know it was against the rules, but in that moment of panic, all I could think about was getting away from those footsteps, from whatever was emerging from that box. I ran blindly in what I hoped was the direction of the break room, my hands outstretched in front of me. My foot caught on something soft and moving, and I crashed to the floor. The impact drove the air from my lungs, and I lay there gasping in the darkness. The footsteps surrounded me now, and I could feel cold breath on the back of my neck. The lights came back on. I was alone in the aisle. The fallen box was gone, and my pallet jack stood exactly where I'd left it at the beginning of my shift, its red paint somehow darker and more worn than I remembered. Only my racing heart and scraped palms suggested anything had happened at all. Tom appeared at the end of the aisle, his clipboard missing, his vest stained with something dark that hadn't been there before. "Rule number 1, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's 1 a.m. We need to get out of this aisle, now." Tom practically dragged me to the break room, his fingers digging into my arm with desperate strength. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, somehow louder than before, their glare harsh against the room's dingy white walls. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper cup of water he thrust at me. "You need to understand what you're dealing with here," he said, pacing the length of the break room. The dark stain on his vest seemed to shift and move in the corner of my vision, but every time I looked directly at it, it appeared perfectly still. "This isn't just some night job. The things that happen here after midnight, they've taken people before." I sipped the water, trying to calm my racing heart. "The missing employee I heard about?" Tom's laugh was hollow, empty of any humor. "Sarah wasn't the first, or the last." He stopped pacing and leaned against the vending machine, which hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. "You saw the rules on the pallet jack? Sarah wrote those, carved them in during her last shift, after..." He trailed off, his eyes distant. "After what?" I pressed, even though part of me didn't want to know. He pulled up a chair, the metal legs scraping against the linoleum with a sound that was almost musical. "It started like this, with boxes moving on their own. But Sarah, she didn't listen. Kept trying to organize everything, even after we warned her about aisle 13. His hands were trembling as he reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a worn, folded piece of paper. "She left this in her locker the night she disappeared." The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, the creases so worn they were almost transparent. I unfolded it carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The handwriting was frantic, words crammed together as if the writer couldn't get them out fast enough. "They're not boxes. Oh God, they're not boxes at all. The whole warehouse is wrong. The shelves go up forever if you look too long." I followed the singing to aisle 13. The products aren't products. They're memories. They're people. All the people who broke the rules. I can hear them scratching to get out. The pallet jack knows. It's trying to help us. Don't let go of it. Don't ever let go. They're coming for me now. I can hear them whispering my name. If you're reading this, I'm already... The note ended there, mid-sentence, with a long ink streak as if the pen had been violently dragged away. "The next morning," Tom continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "all we found was her pallet jack in aisle 13 and a new box on the shelf that hadn't been there before. No labels, no barcodes, just like the one you saw tonight." My phone buzzed in my pocket, 1:30 a.m. The break room lights flickered once, and in that brief moment of darkness, I swore I saw something move behind Tom. A shape that wasn't quite human, cast in shadows that shouldn't have been possible. "Why don't you quit?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why does anyone stay?" Tom's smile was sad, resigned. "You don't think we've tried? Notice how your car wouldn't start when you tried to leave early during orientation last week? The warehouse? It chooses its workers. And once it has you..." He gestured to the dark stain on his vest, which I now realized was slowly spreading, seeping through the fabric like living ink. A sound echoed through the warehouse then, the unmistakable squeak of my abandoned pallet jack's wheels. But I was here, and Tom was here, so who was moving it? "Listen carefully," Tom said, suddenly intense. "The rules aren't just guidelines. They're a survival manual. Each one is written in blood." Sarah knew that. She tried to warn us, tried to leave us a way to survive. But there's one rule she didn't get a chance to write down. The most important one. The lights flickered again, longer this time. In the darkness, I heard that chorus of whispers calling my name, closer now, more insistent. When the lights came back, Tom was standing by the break room door, his face cast in shadow despite the overhead fluorescence. "Never," he said, his voice changing, deepening into something that echoed with multiple tones. "Never ask about the boxes in aisle 13, because once you know what's inside them." The lights went out completely, and in the darkness, I heard the break room door slam shut. The darkness in the break room was absolute, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight. The air had grown thick and cold, carrying the musty scent of old cardboard and something else, something metallic and sweet that reminded me of copper pennies. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen's glow illuminated a small circle around me, but the light seemed wrong somehow, like it was being absorbed by the darkness rather than pushing it back. The break room door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall as if it had never existed. Tom was gone too, though the chair he'd been sitting in still rocked slightly back and forth, its movement accompanied by a soft creaking that sounded almost like whispered words. My phone showed 1:47 a.m. The numbers flickered and changed as I watched. 1:48, 1:49, 1:50, counting up far too quickly. Time wasn't moving right anymore. A sound drew my attention, the familiar squeak of wheels rolling across the concrete. My pallet jack. It was moving through the warehouse somewhere beyond these walls, its distinctive sound growing closer, then farther away, as if something was pacing with it. Following each squeak was another sound, a wet sliding noise like something being dragged. "Tom?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. The darkness seemed to thicken around my phone's light, reaching for it with shadowy tendrils that shouldn't have been possible. "He can't help you anymore." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of whispers that merged into something almost human. "No one can. You asked about aisle 13. You know too much now." The walls began to move, the cheap paneling rippling like water. Shapes pressed against them from the other side. Hands, faces, bodies contorted into impossible positions. I recognized one of them. The same face I'd seen on the employee bulletin board, labeled Sarah Martinez, missing since 2019. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. My phone's screen flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. The temperature dropped until I could feel ice crystals forming on my skin. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and I realized they were reciting the rules, but wrong, backward, distorted, in voices that cracked and broke in inhuman ways. Something cold and wet wrapped around my ankle. I kicked out instinctively, and my foot connected with what felt like a box. A cardboard box that shouldn't have been there. It made a sound no box should make. A quiet, pained whimper. "Your pallet jack misses you," the chorus whispered, closer now. "It's been so lonely since you abandoned it. Break the rules and face the consequences. That's how it works here. That's how it's always worked." The darkness retreated suddenly, pulling back like a tide to reveal I was no longer in the break room. Instead, I stood at the entrance to aisle 13. The shelves stretched upward impossibly high, disappearing into shadows that twisted and writhed far above. My pallet jack waited at the far end, its red paint now black and glistening wet in the flickering lights. Every box in the aisle had a name scratched into it. I saw Sarah's near the top, Tom's a few shelves down, and others, dozens of others, each labeled with dates going back decades. Empty spaces waited between them, like gaps in teeth, waiting to be filled. On the lowest shelf at eye level sat a fresh, empty box with my name already carved into the side. "Welcome to the night shift," the voices whispered in unison. "Your real shift, the one that never ends." The fluorescent lights began to pop, one by one, darkness advancing down the aisle toward me like a wave. In their dying light, I saw movement inside the boxes, shadows shifting, cardboard bulging outward, sealed tops starting to open. From Sarah's box came a sound like distant singing, a lullaby twisted into something horrible. My pallet jack's wheels squeaked once more, but the sound was different now, almost like laughter. As the last light prepared to burst, I saw what had happened to Tom. He stood beside my pallet jack, but he wasn't Tom anymore. His vest had become part of him, the dark stains spread across his entire body, his form rippling and changing like living shadows. In his hands he held his clipboard, but now I could see what was really written on it. Not inventory lists, but names. And mine had just been added to the bottom. The final light exploded above me, and in the darkness, I heard the boxes begin to open all at once. The darkness that filled aisle 13 was different from normal darkness. It moved with purpose, swirling around me like cold water. My phone's flashlight cut through it in weak, faltering beams that seemed to illuminate things that shouldn't be there, shapes that disappeared when I tried to look at them directly. The beam caught glimpses of hands reaching from opened boxes, fingers elongated and twisted like tree branches, casting shadows that moved independently of their owners. My name echoed through the warehouse in a horrible chorus, each voice slightly out of sync with the others. Some sounded fresh and desperate, while others were older, worn down by time and darkness until they were barely more than whispers. I recognized Sarah's voice among them now, and Tom's too, though his had taken on that multiple-toned quality that made my ears ache. "The rules exist for a reason," the thing that had been Tom said, its clipboard dripping dark liquid onto the concrete floor. Where the drops landed, the surface seemed to ripple and sink, creating tiny whirlpools in what should have been solid ground. They're not just rules, they're chains, bonds, the only things keeping this place from... It gestured at the twisted reality around us with a hand that kept changing shape, fingers splitting and reforming like shadows in running water. The pallet jack squealed across the floor toward me, moving on its own now, its wheels leaving trails of frost on the concrete. The red paint had completely transformed into that living darkness that had consumed Tom, and I could see words forming and dissolving in it. Hundreds of rules, written and rewritten, each one etched in desperation by workers who'd come before. A box fell from the highest shelf, but instead of dropping straight down, it spiraled through the air like a leaf in autumn. It burst open before hitting the ground, and from it spilled not products, but memories. I saw flashes of previous night shifts, workers discovering the rules one by one, their faces transforming from confusion to understanding to horror. Each memory moved like a film projection without a screen, floating in the air before dissolving into that living darkness. "You abandoned your pallet jack," the chorus whispered, and now I could see shapes forming in the darkness around me, the outlines of every worker who'd broken that rule, their forms twisted and stretched by whatever force had claimed them. "But it never abandoned you. It's been watching, waiting, keeping score. Every rule you break weakens the chains. I backed away, but the concrete beneath my feet had become soft and uncertain, each step sinking slightly before finding purchase. The shelves around me grew taller, stretching up into infinity, and I realized with growing horror that they weren't shelves at all anymore. They were bars of a cage, a prison built from retail storage and human terror. The box with my name began to glow from within, a sickly pale light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The cardboard split along its seams, peeling open like flower petals to reveal a space inside that was much larger than it should have been. Inside, I saw what looked like another warehouse, identical to this one but wrong somehow, reversed, inverted, a mirror image built from shadows and fear. "Your shift isn't over," Tom's distorted voice came from behind me. "It's only just beginning. Time moves differently here after dark. Days become weeks, become years, and every second is spent organizing, restocking, and following the rules. Because when you break them..." He gestured at the open boxes around us, and the sounds that emerged from them were horrible. Screams and whispers and pleading voices all mixed together into a symphony of regret. The darkness began to coalesce into something solid, a shape that loomed over the entire aisle like a wave about to break. My pallet jack rolled to a stop beside me, its handle extended like an offering, or a trap. "Take it," the chorus whispered. "Take it and start again. Follow the rules this time. All of them. Or join us in the boxes. Become part of the inventory. Another lost soul in aisle 13's endless stock." The darkness surged forward, and in that moment, I had to make a choice. Grab the pallet jack and accept whatever terrible bargain it represented, or face what waited in that box with my name, where an infinity of night shifts stretched out in an endless loop of retail horror. Time stretched like taffy in that moment of decision, each second expanding into an eternity as the darkness pressed in around me. The pallet jack waited, its handle gleaming with that wet, black substance that had consumed Tom. My box gaped open, showing me glimpses of that mirror world where fluorescent lights cast shadows in impossible directions and shelves twisted into non-Euclidean geometries. I reached for the pallet jack's handle. What choice did I have? But as my fingers brushed the cold metal, the rules etched into its surface began to move, squirming under my touch like living things. New words carved themselves into the steel, cut by invisible hands. The final rule: once you accept the night shift, it owns you forever. Your time becomes its time. Your life becomes its inventory. The chorus of voices swelled around me, Sarah, Tom, and countless others whose names had been scratched into boxes over the decades. They spoke in unison now, their words carrying the weight of desperate experience. We all made the same choice. We all thought we could beat it. Follow the rules better next time. Be more careful. But the warehouse doesn't want careful workers. It wants souls to stock its shelves. My phone's screen lit up suddenly, displaying a time that couldn't be right: 13:87 a.m. The numbers continued to twist and change, cycling through impossible hours and non-existent minutes. In its light, I saw the truth of what the warehouse had become, or maybe what it had always been. The shelves weren't just stretching up into darkness, they were breathing, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the throbbing of that sick light inside my waiting box. The thing that had been Tom stepped forward, its form rippling like heat waves over hot asphalt. The clipboard in its hands had transformed into something organic, pages fluttering like gills, ink flowing across them in patterns that hurt to look at. "There's a worse fate than joining us in the boxes," it said in that multi-toned voice. "Those who refuse to choose, who try to run, they become part of the warehouse itself. Every shelf, Every fluorescent light, every squeaking wheel. They were all workers once, before they tried to escape their shifts. As if to confirm this horror, I heard a sound from above. The lights were humming, but not with electricity. They were humming a tune, discordant and broken, like a lullaby sung by something that had only heard of music secondhand. And in that horrible melody, I could make out words, names, dates, shifts that had started decades ago and never ended. The darkness surged forward again, more insistent this time. My box pulsed with that sickly light, its cardboard edges now lined with something that looked disturbingly like teeth. The pallet jack's wheels squeaked a question, the sound somehow forming words. Choose. Join. Begin again. I looked down at my phone one last time, watching as the numbers spun wildly. 25:99 a.m., 6:13 a.m., 14:92 a.m. Time had no meaning here anymore. The night shift was eternal, stretching forward and backward like the endless rows of shelves above me. The darkness was almost solid now, forming hands that reached for me with fingers made of shadow and regret. My box gaped wider, showing me glimpses of myself working endless shifts, stocking infinite shelves, and following rules that grew more numerous and more twisted with each passing hour that wasn't really an hour. I made my choice. The warehouse shadows surged forward, and somewhere in the distance, a time clock punched, marking the beginning of a shift that would never end. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was my phone's screen, displaying a final impossible time. Forever. 13 a.m. When the morning crew arrived the next day, they found aisle 13 perfectly organized, every box aligned with geometric precision. A new pallet jack waited by the time clock, its red paint fresh and gleaming. On its handle, a single rule was etched in pristine lettering. Welcome to the night shift. Time to start your forever. A week later, a new hire walked through the employee entrance, desperate for work and grateful for the night shift position. They found the warehouse eerily quiet, the rows of shelves stretching up into shadow. A red pallet jack waited by the time clock, its paint somehow both fresh and worn, its handle covered in strange etchings that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. The night manager handed them their vest and clipboard, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Just remember the rules," he said, his voice carrying an echo it shouldn't have had. All of them, especially the ones about aisle 13. As the new hire began their first shift, they could have sworn they heard something in the darkness between the shelves, the sound of multiple voices whispering in unison, reciting rules that went on forever. And somewhere in that chorus was a fresh voice, still learning the words to a song that would never end. The time clock punched. 12 a.m. Another night shift had begun.